If you're not subscribed to Arm Wars, you are a bellend.
I'm not going to just show up to compete. If I'm coming to win. Never one time did I play against somebody that I was not stronger than. And I would knock them out. Like completely knock them out cold, right? There's one time I broke a guy's back. What? It's not as important to you. Are you kidding me? I mean, you thought, and there were certain days you thought you were gonna die, like for sure. And so I was so upset with that.
Ladies and gents, Arm Wars YouTube channel members and all you other peeps out there, there's a reason that I look this small, even though I'm trying my very best to out-angle him. And that is because I am with Brian Shaw, Colorado's own, USA's own. This man may be the strongest human being that has ever existed. He's certainly in that conversation. 4 times he's held the title of the world's strongest man. And now, unless you've been living under a rock, you'll be well aware of the fact that Brian has decided to transition into the game of iron arms. Welcome to Arm Wrestling, Brian Shaw. Absolute honor to have you involved in it.
I appreciate that, brother. Thank you.
So Brian, I wanted to really dig back into the origins of Brian Shaw. Obviously, we're seeing you come into a different sport now.
Yep.
But Strongman, where you made your name, was not your first sport. And I wanted to sort of go right back to your childhood. Firstly, your size being such a thing. Were you huge as a child? Were you the biggest kid in the school?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I would say that, if you go way back, right, like early years, I was always the biggest kid in my class. Like, that was pretty much a given. I mean, even when I was younger, I would enter little contests and this type of thing, and my mom had to literally carry around my birth certificate to prove that I was the age that I was, because I was so much bigger, so much heavier. Like, it was wild.
Can you recall sort of any of your stats in those early years where, let's say, where was your first memory of being significantly bigger? When were you getting to sort of adult size or weight?
I mean, I was, I would say, well, grade school, I was very quickly over 200 pounds.
Wow.
So it wasn't, and walking into like high school, right? So like right out of 8th grade, I was like 6'4" and 230, something like this. And then in high school, I got up to almost 300 pounds in high school. So, and that was before I started training really. It was just, I was just a big, just
what height were you when you went into high school?
6'4", 6'5", somewhere in there. Yeah.
So just for clarity, when he was going into high school, he was significantly taller and heavier than I was competing at my peak. That's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And Brian, originally it was basketball, yeah? Were you into other sports prior to that, or what was your first love?
Well, I played everything. I mean, growing up, it was, soccer and baseball and basketball and football. I really, really did everything. And then it was my focus, I would say probably 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade. Like I did play football, basketball, did some track stuff like throwing, like the shot put and discus. And then going into high school, like that's really where I kind of zoned in on basketball. It was like, hey, I want to do this. I want to play in college.
Yep.
I want to earn a scholarship. So I really had that that goal-driven mindset at that age where I was like, hey, I have to do this. And if I want to go to the next level, I have to practice. I have to dedicate, myself to that. So in high school, I really, really focused on basketball.
So let's look at sort of the other sports you did as well. And were there any early inspirations in your life? Because I spoke to, for example, Eddie, Bill Kazmaier, other guys that you know very well. And they tell you the story when I sat down with Bill and I sat down with Eddie, and they say, okay, I knew early doors that I was going into strength. Was that the same with you, Brian, or not so much?
No, I wouldn't say strength. I was fascinated by strength, but it was not something where I was like, all right, I'm going to be a strongman, right? Like, I mean, I remember watching strongman on TV when I was younger, like even middle school age, right? And I was was fascinated by it. The size, the strength. I love that. And then I probably loved it even more once I started actually training myself.
Okay.
But my sole focus still remained basketball. It wasn't any type of thoughts or aspirations or anything to be like, oh, I want to try to be the biggest and strongest. It was like, I want to train in the weight room to get better for basketball.
Okay.
Right?
Who was your earliest icon, idol, sporting hero?
The natural answer to that would be Michael Jordan, right? Like, because I watched, Chicago Bulls in the 90s were unreal. Everything was that. I would say probably basketball related. The other guy then was Shaquille O'Neal.
Sure.
Because, I could relate to him in different ways because of his size, right? So I remember I got this magazine and it had his hand in it, and it was, you could put your hand up to his, and then, it talked about him having trouble with finding shoes.
Yeah.
At that time, I was having trouble finding shoes because you couldn't go to a shoe store and get shoes. Like I grew out of that size where they would carry it in the store. So I had to try to, pick out in a magazine and call and order shoes, and maybe they had them, maybe they didn't. Finding clothes became a problem. So I started to have a lot of the things. And then when I read about Shaquille O'Neal, I was like, well, this guy's size 22 shoe, they have to be specially made. Yeah. So at least mine I could still find, but he's like going through all these problems. And I was like, well, I can relate to that at least in a way. And then he was dominant playing basketball, right? So it's like, all right, well, this is a guy like I can relate to that. The size, the power, like I like that. I like that a lot.
And who was your sort of guidance in the basketball thing? Was there any? A lot of people I know have got some kind of family history in the game of basketball. Was that the same with yourself, mate? Was your dad?
Yeah. My uncle.
Your uncle.
Yeah, my uncle coached me as an 8th grader and then as a freshman in high school.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he was a coach for a very, very long time, and so I would say partially it was maybe that my town, which was not a big town that I grew up in, the whole town was focused on the basketball team. So like going to those games as a kid was, I remember walking into the gym, and when it was a basketball game, it was like the energy was just so, you could just feel it, right? So as a kid, you're like envisioning yourself being out on the court playing and watching the guys when you're younger, that type of thing. So I think that drew me to it. The fact that town got so behind the basketball team, that also was a big motivating factor. And I think in a way, it was actually a good thing that the football team wasn't better. So they were very bad. Like and none of the guys took it very seriously. So the football team in my 4 years of high school won 4 games. So it was really, really not good. Like it was really a bad situation. So I actually think in a way it was a blessing though, because I was so big, tall, strong certainly, but playing football, if I would have played football when I was younger, there's always a risk of injury, right? Because, taking an impact to the knee, for example, right? Like a lot of guys, even guys that I knew in high school mess their knees up, and, they have a life-affecting injury from playing football where somebody, it wasn't even their fault, somebody came in from the side and hit them or rolled over, and they just, so a lot of those things could have happened. But I think my path, had I messed up my knee that badly at a young age, I probably wouldn't have done what I was able to do.
Sure.
Right. So I think that I like to believe at least, your path in life, when you look back, there's reasons that things happen and the why. You may not see it at the time, but like after, it's like, okay, well, basketball developed me in a different way as an athlete, right? Because basketball players, you have to learn how to move and be athletic and, jump and run. And not that football players aren't athletic, but, primarily when you're playing football, you're going forward. Yes, some lateral movement, but I would argue that as an overall athlete, like if you're going to look at an athlete, a basketball player is an athlete. Yeah. You have to be an athlete to be successful with basketball. And so I think really blessed in that way that I had to develop, especially at the size I was at and the strength I was at. I had to learn how to move, and be agile and jump and, like just be athletic all around, So I think that when you get further forward with strongman, like those things became major assets in my game once I transferred over to strongman, right? So I wouldn't change that at all.
No.
Like playing basketball was something that was very fulfilling. I ended up playing in college, getting all my college taken care of 100%, just for playing, right? But also in the same, I guess, aspect of playing basketball, it developed me for what I was going to do next.
And at that time, mate, were you sort of singled out? Obviously, you were a high-level player.
Sure.
Clearly. Would you say that once you got to that higher echelon within the basketball, you were still in the top percentile? Were you still being viewed as very high?
I mean, it's a good question because it becomes very competitive, right? So what you realize, and actually the first day when I went into college, the college coach walked in and was like, hey, look around the room, because every single one of the men standing in there was the best player on their high school team.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
So you're in the Shark Tank all of a sudden.
Yeah. So you were, a big fish in a small pond, and now it's like all the best guys, everybody that wasn't the best player is gone. Now you're dealing with only the best, right?
Were you unique in your physical attributes, your athleticism and strength combination, which is obviously very high?
Yes.
Were there others like you, or were you quite a unique entity within that group?
I was unique as a basketball player because of how strong I was.
Interesting.
So, I mean, even in college practice, right, you would typically you'd split up into post players and perimeter players, right? So even within that group, there were certain things that the coaches would have the post players do.
Yeah.
And I would be singled out and say, like, hey, they would say, for example, hey, come down and hit this guy as hard as you can. And they would say, everybody but Brian. Like, you're not allowed to do that. Like, you're going to hurt somebody.
Yeah.
And so, at least my first couple of years of college, the coach that I had was very military minded, right? So we're going to get rid of weakness. We're going to do things that are going to make you tougher.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're talking just things that a lot of coaches probably wouldn't do, like ball dives, right? So they'd roll a ball. You had to dive onto the wooden court to get the ball. So, I mean, you're talking like just banging up, like busting your elbow up, whatever. But it made you tougher, right?
Yep.
So there's like things that we would do there that were in a way designed to make you quit.
Yeah.
Right? So like the guys
looking who had the stones to go that extra.
Big time. Yeah. I mean, you thought, and there were certain days you thought you were going to die, like for sure. Like it was, and I'm not just saying that. It was like, you have, for example, like at the beginning of the year, you have the walk-ons.
Sure.
You have the scholarship players and you have the walk-ons. So what you have to do is you have to weed it out real quick. So like the scholarship players have to go through it too.
Yeah.
Right. So there's mental, it was a lot more mental toughness, development, right? Like, but he just wanted to make people quit.
Yeah.
Right. So like you had to go through that, but
were you aware of that at the time, Brian? Or is that sort of,
oh yeah, for sure.
so you knew, yeah, this is a test.
100%.
Okay. Did he articulate that? Did he tell you? Or were you just sort of aware from the...
I think probably verbally, I mean, you understood very clearly, like there's, days where, it was a challenge, right? Like it's just, you're going to run until you throw up. And if you throw up, you have to make up whatever you were doing. I mean, these type of things, like it was a different level of discipline, that you have to develop that a lot of people don't understand. Like they wouldn't understand that. And are you going to quit, right? Like, can you go to that spot in your head where it doesn't matter, right? Like you're not going to die and you can convince yourself you're not going to die and you make it through. And then once you make it through that, you can make it through anything. And then like when other hard things come up, you've been there, right? You've lived in that spot. So you can suffer more than the next man, right? And that, right? So like this also, you could argue in a lot of ways, like for me going into strongman would be another attribute of, okay, now I've had to develop it as an athlete, but now mentally I can go somewhere. I'm convinced that I can go somewhere that the next guy can't.
It's remarkable, isn't it, how you body adapt. I always try to liken it to, like it when you pass your driving test.
Sure.
And you get in the car the first day and you get on the motorway and you're going 70 miles an hour and it feels fast and you're like,
oh yeah,
shit.
yeah.
But then 2 years later, you're doing 80 miles an hour and your hands on the window and you're
it's no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
no
weird.
problem.
You don't.
Yeah.
How did I get here? It's just autopilot. You've gone a long way without really understanding it mentally.
100%.
And I think that's quite critical. In the one of the things you said to me the other night when we went out for something to eat, and it really stuck. You said, used to, when I was training in my younger days, used to always sort of isolate the weakness and train the weakness.
Yeah.
Was that from basketball experience, or was that later from strongman experience? Where did you first get that mindset? Because it seemed like you were...
Probably basketball. Probably. I mean, there's different things when you're practicing basketball, and a beautiful thing with basketball is you can practice on your own, right? Mm-hmm. So all you need is a ball. Sometimes you don't even need a hoop, right? So it's like, how do you dribble the ball? Yeah. How do you handle the ball? Developing your offhand, right? So it's like, how good can I get with my left hand? If I'm right-handed, which I am, how good can I get with my left hand? Mm-hmm. Am I a threat with my left hand? And there's, as a post player, especially, being able to go right or left is huge, because then the defender guarding you has to play you a different way if you can go both ways, right? So developing those things, but it's not as easy. It doesn't come as naturally to go left-handed when you're right-handed, right? So you have to put a lot of time in, so you're putting up thousands of shots, right? Like thousands of moves, thousands of, ways to execute, like different situations. And, it's just, can you handle pressure as well, right? Like, so like, pressure situations within a game. And that's stuff I loved. I love that, right? So it's like, if I could get fouled, for example, and be on the free throw line with a second left in the game, you're down by 1, you have 2 shots, can you win? Like, I love that. Love that, right? Like, so I always wanted to be that guy, right? Like, that you would give me that situation, and as you get, again, that's high school. Now you get to college, you still want to be it, but now you have to be a part of a team, right? So there are certain aspects where you want to put the ball in the guy's hands that can execute the best. And if it comes to you, good, you need to get the job done. But you win as a team and you lose as a team, right? And that's, I think, probably, even if you handle your individual battle, your individual assignment within the team, and you win that, if somebody else doesn't, you could lose, right? So, it's not that I certainly embrace that playing basketball, but I think that moving on to strongman, I like that it was an individual deal, right? So like you trained with a crew. You
were accountable for your endeavor. You
have to look in the mirror. You have to look in the mirror and say, hey, I got it done, or I didn't get it done.
I love it. Yeah, right? That's a very similar journey to my own, mate. It really is in that respect. The team sport thing transitioning into the no one else to blame. No one else. No,
you can't. What are you going to say? You say I didn't get it done, right? Like, or I got it done, whatever. Like,
so here's the thing. I'm going to take a step forward and a step backwards, and I'll tell you why. The first thing, again, that I really get, you exude this every time I see you. Always have, your entire career. You seem to be the guy that will think your way through the situation, the event, the sport, and not necessarily just along the sort of route that's already trodden. You seem to be, okay, I get that.
Yep.
And even now in arm wrestling, when we've only been in for 2 minutes, you're already, right, I see what Devon's doing, but I'm also thinking of other things, and I can see you taking all this stuff in. Were you doing that? Was that something that was taught to you by your uncle, by your early coach, or is that a Brian thing?
Brian thing. 100%. Yep. And that's just being, I think it's a critical thinking ability, probably, and just analyzing, right? Like how can you do something different? And I like the example the one example that I would give that I actually took a lot of criticism for was my deadlift stance in Strongman.
This is awesome.
Yep. Deadlift stance in Strongman. So I was taught, or shown, I guess, right? Like you keep a very narrow stance, you know, because this is just what you do.
Yeah.
Right? So like if you're going to deadlift, you walk up to the bar, you don't want your hands too wide, you don't want your feet too
But
wide.
I've always been told.
Yeah. So this is what it is.
Yeah.
The problem was it didn't fit me.
Okay.
It didn't fit.
Yeah.
I didn't like it, right? Like I could never get comfortable with that. So I went back and said, well, I don't like it. I'm not lifting the kind of weight that I think I'm capable of lifting. So let's start to play with it, right? So now I start to think about, well, where can I generate the most power? So if I was going to do, let's just say a vertical jump, where would I have my feet to get the most power up?
Yep.
And then if I was going to do a standing broad jump, where would my feet go? And I wanted my feet wider so I could open up my hips, really drive back and then throw myself forward to get more power, right? So I said, well, that makes sense. Let's go up to the deadlift bar. Let's widen up the stance a little bit and let's see how it goes. And so I'm, you know, luckily for me, I was able to train behind closed doors. I had my own gym set up, own equipment.
So you were pretty secular on this. You weren't talking to people about it. Just
me.
Shut the curtains, get it done.
Yep. And nobody had done it. Right? So like I come out and, you know, I can't remember if it was a video or I maybe saved it till a contest. And I had widened my stance up significantly, like much wider than anybody had ever seen, right? So it's like almost in a way, it was like a very wide stance conventional deadlift.
Yeah.
Right, but my hands are wide.
And this is way prior to all this sumo stuff.
Oh, way
before that ever.
No, way. And I walked out and could deadlift, big weight, right? Like, and I was executing very well, right? And people were criticizing me so much. Like, what kind of stance is that? That's so stupid. Why would you ever do that? I mean, the comments were just like hammering, right? And I was like, well, I'm doing it for me. I'm not saying the next person has to do it, right? But what you saw in the sport was that other guys started to open up their stance a little bit.
Amazing.
Right? And so, it was something like with deadlift, for example, taking that lift in specific, I would film myself from the side 3/4 angle. I was analyzing where my shoulders were moving, where my hips were moving.
Yeah.
And as soon as my form would start to break down, that's where I would call it, right? So, I was able to, deadlift. I mean, you could go back. I lifted, over 1,000 pounds, I think in 13 years, 13 different years, maybe 14 years. So there's guys, it's not that I lifted the heaviest weight, but I could consecutively do it, right?
So ridiculous comment, and you think 1,000 pounds, 14 years on the bounce.
Yeah, on now different deadlift setups, of course. Some were elevated, some were normal height, right?
As you do.
But it like I could do that, right? No problems, no back problems, nothing, right? So I could just do it again and again and again, and repetitively. Where there was guys that came into the sport that could deadlift big weight for sure, but with their form, maybe they couldn't last. There wasn't the longevity. Yeah. But I went to, for me, I found with the deadlift where I could use the biggest muscles, I could get the most locked in, I could generate the most power off the floor and get in the best spot. So, but here's the thing, is none of that would have came to be if I would have just stuck with what I was told.
Yeah.
So that's a thing, but I would do that with everything.
And it's fascinating to me, mate, because the last few days when we've been chatting backwards and forwards about your career, about arm wrestling, about the transition, I'm going to tell you this outright. The most appealing thing, the thing that I am most excited about, which I didn't know prior to coming here, was the manner in which you are so internalized on the critical thinking.
Yeah.
And if you have a weapon coming into arm wrestling, and I mean this for everybody watching, and James will be nodding back because he knows exactly how I think on this, I can guarantee you way more than the frame, which is a huge advantage.
Yeah.
the package of frame and that approach, that's your weapon.
Will help a lot. I
My
hope
God,
so. Yeah,
it is so big.
Yeah.
So big. It really is. I want to go into that more. As if you look at other lifts, and we'll go. Don't worry, we'll go back on track, everybody, in a minute, and we'll get into the strongman career and the transition. But I'm just big into this. Deadlift was one of them.
Yep.
Did you find that you were doing this with frequency and breadth on other stuff in your basketball, in your other lifts in strongman? Has that been a theme constantly throughout your career?
Constant. Yep. So everything. I would analyze video.
Do you pick other athletes apart?
Sometimes.
So in other words, you'd watch them and
strongman,
think, guy could be doing this.
Early in strongman, I had to, right? Because I didn't necessarily have somebody telling me how to do it. It was watching. So it was a trial and error is probably the best way to say it. So it's like, if I go watch somebody else, all right, cool. That's how they are doing it. Let me try. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes I had to modify it.
I'll tell you a story, mate.
Yeah.
I'm competing in the Arnold Classic arm wrestling. Can't even remember the year. You're competing in the strongman. We were on before you. Mm-hmm. I had a good day that day. And stick around. Got my matches won, sticking around watching the strongman. Always obviously massive fan of that. And you came over and you were doing the frame carry.
Okay.
And I'm stood at the side. We're just backstage and you walked past me with a frigging dustpan and brush. You even remember? You were taking the bloody dust off the...
Probably. I did.
And I remember thinking, holy shit.
Yeah.
He's checking the wrong way that you were going up.
Massive.
You were in the frame, looking at all the frame. You spent 10 minutes looking at everything on the kit, walking up to the top, walking back down, before everything got going. And I remember at the time thinking, only one that did it.
Yeah.
None of the other guys. So years later, I'm having a conversation with Eddie.
Yeah.
And Eddie's talking about this same diligence. And the manner in which that's filtered down and resonated throughout, there's very few guys. I'm going to say yourself. Eddie openly took a huge lead from that, from what you do. Alexei Novikov, whilst he doesn't speak brilliant English, but I've been speaking with Alexei when we were at Giants gig, and he's like, I'm talking about inspiration, and he said, Brian Shaw. And he said, just 1,000 words, And I'm like, we go to a very recent show. Mitchell Hooper is out on the floor and he's measuring the gradient of the floor so he can look at which lane he wants to be in for the carrying events. And when I speak to him about it, again, suddenly your name comes up. So this approach is filtered down. And you do find that there are the torchbearer within the sport, the guy that's going to stand up and do it a little different, but it works. Are you conscious of that or not?
I think it was just what I did, right? And I mean, it's neat to hear. I mean, it's neat to hear you say that, right? Like it's fun to like show the guys currently, right? Like for them to take something away from that. I think it's awesome, right? It's not, but for me, I think it made sense, right? There's a couple, experiences in strongman early on where, like one example would be my very first time trying to qualify for World's Strongest Man. We had a farmer's walk event, and they were implements that were loaded on the end with plates, right? So it's kind of like a cylinder plate loaded on the end. Very heavy for back then, very heavy weight. So almost 400 pounds in each hand. Very low pickup as well. So they were, it was out at an Ode Haugen event in California. And so I'm trying to qualify, good event for me because I had a good grip. And nobody was finishing. Very few guys were finishing. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna, kind of, it was a decent run. So I said, I kind of decided that depending on how I would feel, maybe carry it the whole way or put it down kind of like 3/4 way, pick it up again, because I knew that would be a really good time, right? And I put it down, and one of the collars was loose, and all the plates came off the farmers, right? And this was arguably on that day one of my best events. and it really hurt me because in the moment I had to help put the plates back on, put the collar back on, then pick the farmers up. It killed me, but I didn't check. Not that it was my job, but I didn't check the collar.
No.
Right.
Bitter experience. I get it.
Horrible. And it caught, and I didn't make the next cut. I got cut out. I didn't like it was all of it.
Yeah.
And I was like but that moment, I was like, you know what? If I would have just checked the collar, even though it's not my job as an athlete, I don't ever trust anybody else again.
Yeah.
Never. Like never ever. So like, I mean, you're talking yoke heights, right? Like you go out and do your measurement. Most athletes would never remember the number, the setting. I knew it. So every single time I walked out to yoke, I made sure that the equipment guys were doing my setting that I had chosen in the rules meeting.
So for any arm wrestlers watching, guys, if you don't know what Brian's referring to there, so the yoke, it's a frame that goes on your back, and the bar is set to the height of the athlete, so there's no advantage or disadvantage in terms of the pickup on the lift.
Yeah.
That's what Brian's referring to there. So when they put him into the yoke, it's preset to the athlete's height, to suit the athlete's height. So that's just to clarify for any arm wrestlers. I'm sure all the strongman fans out there are 100% over it.
But it's happened before where, and it's not the equipment guys are trying to do a job quickly, right? So they're under a lot of pressure to get it changed. And if they just put it on the wrong hole and you take off, what are you supposed to do?
Exactly.
So now you didn't pick it up and it's dragging on the ground, or you had to pick it up way too low, whatever. So it's like things like this. I wanted to be in control, right? And I mean, there's different experiences over my career. Speaking of lane assignments, and not that this happens a lot anymore, but 2015 World's Strongest Man, we had a heavy yoke race to start the final that year, and I was in a great spot, man. It was 500 kilo yoke loaded with people, right? And I knew it. I knew Hofdor would be good at that. And I took off and I had him, man. And then there was a hole. It was a significant, like in the asphalt, because we're in a parking lot.
Oh my God!
Right. And I came down with that, and I hit that spot where I sunk down, and it killed me. Like
just an indentation in the truck.
And I didn't notice it.
What weight was it?
500 kilos. Yeah. And Hofdor got me. I had him, and I hit that, and I didn't drop it. But man, it killed me.
All over the place. Yeah.
And but that was, I mean, obviously well into my career. I was so off about that, because it's like, number one, if I would have done a better job walking the lane, which I did walk the lane, I just didn't notice it. Yeah. Right? But if I would have noticed that, I would have hugged one side of the lane and told them to set the yoke up that way. Or, knowing me, I probably would have said, you need to change the course because I'm not running that lane. Yeah. Right? But it killed, and at one point, again, it cost me 1 point because Hofdor won that race. I got second. But I know very well what 1 point can do, what half a point can do. And so I was so upset with that. But that moment, like, it wasn't my fault that the lane was wrong. It was, I should have identified it though, right? Because I probably could have corrected it and won that race. It was there. It just, these type of things, man. And it, again, it was always mind blowing to me to watch the other athletes. I mean, for context, right? You've trained how long? You not for that one contest, but the body of your career. You've trained for years. And then dedicated how many months just to that one event, if not a whole year, whatever. But to leave it so much in the hands of somebody else, whether it's set up or, like you not noticing something, I just, for me, like that, right? Like, I'll remember that forever, that yoke race. I didn't check that.
Those are the things that keep you awake at night.
It's just, it's like one of those things where I should have done a better job there. Now, granted, I won in 2015, so it's okay. But, still, it could have been better. Yeah. Right? Like, even
especially
with that
for a
win,
guy like yourself from a legacy perspective, because 4 times, if you get 5, there we are.
Well, this is, I mean, that's another one. That's another one. 2010 is another one. Oh, God, I mean, that's, you could argue like with that one in different ways, right? And here's the real kicker with 2010.
I felt bad for you, mate. I'm going to be honest. At that time, I was like, you are having a laugh.
It's crazy. Well, here's the thing with that, Neil, is it wasn't written in the rules. They did not have it written in the rules that what happens in the event of a tie. It wasn't there. And then here to even more of a kick in the nuts, they changed the rule to whoever wins the Atlas Stones wins overall. Well, guess who won the Atlas Stones in 2010? Right? So if the rule, it's horrible. It's horrible. And I don't agree. I actually don't agree with that. I think that you should have an outright tiebreaker.
Yep.
Right? Because it's not to decide a title that is so big on a countback is ridiculous, first place. And also then to decide it just based on the result of one event.
Yeah. And
let's just assume that whoever's in the contest isn't the best at stones, but they've now scored the same points. And just because somebody's a better stone
for
loader,
the person that's in that situation,
I don't agree
when
with
a
it.
rule change comes after, it's like it becomes so, everybody looks at that instance and thinks, oh my God, that is harsh. And then it transitions the entire rule system into that. It's
the whole landscape. I mean, and this is a different tangent of a conversation, but let's just assume that rule was in place in 2010, right? So the winner of the stones wins the event. So I win. Now I've got 5. So Jonas has 3. And that's, how does that change the landscape?
Sliding doors.
It changes massively. So it's, but again, here's what I'll say to that is in 2010, sandbags were loaded with gravel. They were reset in water. Yeah. It had a lot of water in it. Should I have identified that and pushed it on more? Because a gravel-filled bag normally would stay in place. Yeah. But because it had so much water, that's why it fell. But you can look at that contest and break it down. I should have pressed, there was a 185 log that I missed. I should have had that all day. If I do that, I win. Frame carry, there's other aspects of that contest.
This is what, last night it came up we had a podcast last night on Brian's channel. Go and check that out, guys, if you want to hate me for the rest of your natural life. But it came up in that circumstance, and I referred to the Sandbag in 2010 because it was, I think, probably the most brutal, one of the absolute, and it's acts of God stuff.
Yeah,
it's when something comes out of left field, you just cannot, you can't really take that on yourself. It's one of those things. It's like, where did that come from?
Okay, so now you take the flip side of that. Okay, let's just say that would have happened.
Yeah,
because in that 17-hour plane ride back from South Africa in 2010. There was a lot of things that were thought about that were ingrained kind of in my head because of that moment, right? So now I don't take anything for granted, for sure. I work even harder. I'm more disciplined. I'm even more driven, right? Like you could argue maybe, and I tried to take it this way because it's such a tough moment.
Sure.
But if it drives you even harder to be even better.
Yeah.
And that's what I had to say, right? Because I can't go back.
It's bitter life experience at the highest of the highest at the highest level.
It doesn't get any, It doesn't get any more real than that. So, you have to turn it into a positive, right? So that was where, my mentality was really ingrained. A lot of things stemmed from that, right? So in the long run, the goal was to turn it into a positive because you're at a absolute low, right? I think it's probably hard to say that that's not the worst ending, like for somebody in World's Strongest Man, because it's one thing to be a half a point away, 1 point away. Okay, cool. For you to tie, which is the only tie in history, and lose on a countback, then they changed the rule to the stones after the fact. It doesn't get any worse than that. It doesn't. Brutal. There's guys that have slipped up at the last moment, right? We've seen this.
Yeah.
And that can be tough too. I'm not going to say it's not tough, but also they didn't tie. There was a winner for sure, but to tie on it. So you have to manipulate it and twist it into something positive. You have to.
I have another friend,
right?
Little story for you guys. So a friend of mine, James knows him, this fella called Richard Berry. Call him the Iron Man of Darwin. Extremely fit, athletic guy when he's a young man. He's on the TV show. You got in America, the Gladiators. You know Gladiators? Mm-hmm. So Richard is supremely fit lad, gets selected for Gladiators, goes on Gladiators, wins everything on Gladiators, it's going brilliantly. Gets into the final with a fella called Phil Norman, who's a professional MMA fighter. And these two guys are going for the International Gladiators. They're both winners. Richard wins every event, all the individual events. But at this time in Gladiators, if you won the event, you got the 10 points, 5 points, whatever it was. Whether or not you won, if you completed the event,
oh wow,
it was the points were even. Okay,
yeah.
So they both complete because they're both amazing. So they beat the Gladiators in every event, but Richard wins of the contenders. Richard wins, Phil's second. Richard wins, Phil's second. All of them.
Yeah.
And they come to the last thing, the Eliminator, it's called in England.
I remember that.
Now, Richard's more powerfully built guy. Phil Norman, slim, lithe, fast athlete.
Yeah.
Okay. They start with no time separation because they both get the same amount of points. Okay.
That's cool.
Even in that situation, Richard and Phil Norman break through the barrier, and it is a photo finish so tight that they cannot separate the lads for like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Eventually, Phil Norman gets it because his toe broke just before Richard's chest. So Richard's body comes through first.
Yep.
Phil Norman's toe comes through. Richard is out. The International Gladiators loses like he would have won like a car,
everything,
100 grand.
Yeah,
it's over. He's done. Phil Norman goes on to win. And then immediately after that, massive amount of complaints come in.
Yes, I bet.
This is ridiculous. Richard Birdie won every goddamn event.
And
he loses on one event, and it's the event that's suited to the athlete. And this is not about Phil Norman, lovely dude.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly the same situation. The very next show.
Yep.
Okay, the contender who wins gets 10 points. The contender who is second
So
gets
they
5
changed
points.
it.
They changed it at the very next show.
Yep.
And I remember being with Richard, and Richard's like, exactly that. He's like, you are joking.
That's a joke.
In that scenario, I've got like a 20-second head start on Phil going into the Eliminator.
Yes, 100%.
Exact same
It's
situation.
wild.
Richard Berry, love you.
Going over the line, it's chest first. It's always chest first.
It should be. Phil Norman gets toe for, but that's
a raw deal.
Yeah,
man.
raw deal. And he would have won life-changing money for him and his family. Absolutely. Sliding doors.
Yes. Wild.
Sliding doors.
That's wild, man.
So it's these things that are. Anyway, I'm conscious of Brian's time, guys, because he needs to eat. Obviously, he's not a guy that skips breakfast, as you can see. We're here for a few days. We're also maybe seeing Brian again in January if all things go well. But this is just part one. We're going to be checking in with Brian more because I'll be honest with you, I've been absolutely fascinated.
Love it, man.
To hear the story, and I'm sure you guys at home have, whether you're a Strongman fan, whether you're an arm wrestling fan. Part one with Brian Shaw. Why Strongman? Where'd that come from?
If I'm coming to win. Never one time did I play against somebody that I was not stronger than, and I would knock them out, like completely knock them out cold. What? It's not as important to you. Are you kidding me? I broke a guy's back.
If you're not subscribed to Arm Wars, you are a bellend.
Arm wrestling. It's my passion. It's something that not many people know about, but they should. There's something so special about this sport, whether it's the camaraderie from the community, or whether it's the action, the fear, the excitement, the explosion that happens in the center of that table, one-on-one combat. It's something I wish everybody could experience. I think if the kids of this world had an opportunity to see arm wrestling in the right light, they'd fall in love with it too, just like I have. I've been seduced by this sport. I love everything about it. And I want to share that passion with everybody else in the world. So, check out Arm Wars. Check out arm wrestling. Support our community. Get involved.
I'm obsessed with wanting to be the greatest. It's part of who I am.
The world's premier supermatch arm wrestling format.
It caters to the purest of the sport.
Arm Wars is the choice by far.
The old monster rule.
It's an arena like no other. It's the best of the best.
How far are you ready to go?